This has been ongoing. We have a young kitty that's still quite active in the night, either sleeping in between us or explores the dark house periodically and later returns, sometimes for several cycles of this. We also have baseboard nightlights, which are motion activated, and being a restless sleeper, I'm usually aware of when the cat wanders off down the hall. It's when I know and hear our cat piddling around somewhere in the kitchen where we store the snacks, when the sudden phantom paws begin to press down on the sheets and walk over the bedding to assume its spot for the night. But every time I reach for a cat, there's nothing there. Eventually, sometime later, I feel and see our regular furry family member jump onto the bed, and which begins the usual attack my toes game, like normal. What is both unnerving and comforting at the same time is that we had a very special tabby for 18 years, crossed over a few years ago. For a few weeks after his passing, I would hear the little plastic cat flap built into the master bathroom door for the litter box squeak a little, but those strange sensations on the bed covers have been consistently felt since then, just now more often with our recent new feline addition. That is, until the other night. Having heard the kitty committing active mayhem somewhere in the dark house, I made the familiar endearment calls to get her to knock it off and come on and settle down for the night. Instantly, there was a disembodied voice, seemingly female, inside the bedroom which seemed to mimic what I had just vocalized. The cat, meanwhile, didn't return to our bedroom until over an hour later. It's moments like these when I'm terrified and comforted in my sleepless state, while contemplating if I should investigate this suspected paranormal activity further. Trouble is, I don't know what's behind the door, or rather, if I find several doors and don't know which one to open first. So this probably isn't as scary as most of the stories on this subreddit, but I'll put it in here anyways. I was 16 when this happened, so my mom and I stayed the night at my sister's house. We were staying in a bedroom in the basement. The basement was completely renovated and had windows and a door leading into the backyard, so not very creepy. My mom, sister, and her kids were all upstairs eating breakfast, while I went to have a shower in the bathroom right next to our room. Everything was fine until I got out and was drying myself off. As I was drying myself off, the light started to lightly flicker, but I didn't think anything of it. I realized I forgot to grab my clothes, so I quickly dried off, wrapped the towel around myself, and went to the door. It didn't open. I figured that I might have locked the door, but just forgot, though I was sure I didn't, and unlocked it and tried to open it. It still didn't open. It was then that the light started to flicker more rapidly, as if someone was quickly hitting the light switch on and off. I started to freak out and desperately tried to open the door, but it wouldn't budge no matter what I did. The light started to flicker on and off quicker and quicker. I yelled for help, and I could hear my mom running down the stairs, but then the light stopped, and I was suddenly able to open the door right as my mom was rounding the corner to enter the hallway. When I told my mom and sister, they thought it was so funny. My sister said it was probably the steam making the lights flicker, but that doesn't explain why the door wouldn't open no matter which way I turned the lock. The whole incident, from when the lights started rapidly flickering to when I was able to open the door, probably lasted 25 to 30 seconds. So I'm a custodian at a local high school. My shift is 4 p.m. to 12 a.m. We have a pretty large performing arts center, and I honestly hate cleaning it at night because it's always dark when I go in, and I have to search around with my phone's flashlight until I get to the light switches. In the back of the pack, there's a classroom, 2 bathrooms, and a makeup/costume room, where there are at least 8 mirrors each on both sides of the room facing each other, creating an infinity mirror. It terrifies me to go in there and look into them most of the time. My first experience happened when I was out there with a coworker. He's more sensitive to energies and feels them right away, whereas I don't really notice shifts in them unless they are pointed out or they are majorly different and noticeable. We walked into the makeup room and he stopped and said, "Did you feel that? The change in energy?" And I told him no, but then I left and came back into the room maybe 5 minutes later. And since I was already thinking about it, I instantly picked up a heavier, deep feeling in the atmosphere when I walked in. I described it to him and he said that's what he felt too. Off and on, I'll hear things rattle like doors and things around the back of the building where the makeup room is, and I'll feel uneasy, but it wasn't until I had my fiancée start working with me yesterday that things got more pronounced. She used to be Wiccan and had dealt with a lot of paranormal and demons who stayed with her for years, and on top of that, she's an empath, so she's more susceptible to energy shifts and entities. I made the mistake of talking about the weird feelings and sounds I hear when I'm in there while we were cleaning in the back of the pack, and when she was walking around, she said she felt something brush her neck. We also walked through the doorway to the bathroom, and it got significantly colder, even though we were in there not long prior, and it felt the same temperature as the other rooms. When she pointed it out and we were talking about it, I started hearing small voices, and I couldn't tell if I was just making it up in my head or if the squeaky door I was leaning against was doing it, but I told her to stop talking, and I stopped moving the door, and then she heard it too for a second. We left and had my coworker come in and help us, and after he was done, he left the building with us across the room, and by the time we got halfway to the door, we felt cold for a second, and then back to the regular temperature. People are telling me it's a possible poltergeist given the fact that they are created unintentionally, and because it's a theater building where plays go on, someone could have been really into a character or angry and accidentally created it. Others have said it was most likely intentional. Does anyone have any ideas? I'm not sure what it is, but it terrifies me. When I was younger, around 12, my dad moved into a house. Now, this house always gave me weird vibes. I constantly felt like I was being watched. I couldn't sleep with my door open or without the TV on. Now, this is going to be two separate stories put into one. The first experience I had was around 2 a.m. I was in the living room watching TV. It was a weekend, so I was living up not having a bedtime. Now, the layout of my house was slightly weird, and the living room was dead center in the house, surrounded by dark hallways and rooms. I started hearing noises in the kitchen, but thought nothing of it because we had dogs. A couple of minutes go by, and I can faintly hear my parents in their bedroom doing stuff. Gross, I know. They were being loud, so I went to turn to look in the direction of their room. I was sitting with my back to the hallway, and as I'm turning, clear as day, I hear a child's voice in my ear say, "Don't turn around." I froze in place, absolutely paralyzed with fear. Then I felt a tug on my hair. I promptly jumped up and turned on every light in my house as fast as I could. I didn't hear anything for the rest of the night, but needless to say, I didn't go to sleep until the sun was up. Fast forward to a couple months later, it's Christmas Eve. Me and my siblings were sent to bed to prepare for Santa to drop the presents off. It was around midnight and I was laying in bed watching TV. I was too excited about presents to sleep. I saw something out of the corner of my eye and looked over at my closed door. As I looked over, I saw a bright blue mist figure float through my door. It was glowing, but not enough to light up my room. I watched as it floated from my door and through my closed closet door. I was once again absolutely shocked. I covered up my head with the blanket for a couple minutes until I felt better. I then laid on my side facing the other side of my bed. The blanket took the shape of someone lying next to me. I laid there and watched as the blanket moved as if someone was breathing. This went on for a couple of minutes, and then suddenly the blanket laid flat again on the bed. This all happened 12 years ago, and at the time I told myself I was just imagining things. However, the older I get, the more I'm convinced that something was up with that house. When I talked to my dad about it, he told me some stories they had about hearing a little boy when no one was there. I've done research on the house and never found anything. However, as we moved out, we found handprints made in the concrete on the driveway. 2 sets of child handprints, with 1978 written underneath. Way back in 8th grade, I had a friend John, who years before had his house burned and deemed unlivable. Now, being a kid full of confidence and not fully believing yet, me and another friend Jim called BS that said burned house was haunted. Finally one day, John agrees, and we go see this house as his family still had the keys and was on his way home. Walking up to the place, John had told us about several experiences in the house, from a large Civil War looking soldier to energy balls and children's laughter that would appear and disappear. Taking this information, we still called BS and went inside the house. The inside of the house was fine, as the garage had burned, making it a hazard but safe enough to explore. The inside of the house felt strange. Zero airflow but no dust, and at first dead silence. After walking in and essentially walking straight to the garage entrance and the back door to show the fire marks and point out where John had found arrowheads in his backyard, we decided to look around more. Very soon after we started walking towards their old rooms, we all very faintly heard music. The strangest part is each of us heard entirely different genres: rock, classical, and rap. We reached John's sister's old room, and it was barren, of course, and the windows were covered, but nothing weird. Then the same with John's old room. Between the two of them, most of the apparitions had started and then gone and disappeared into John's parents' room. Logically, that was our next and final stop of the tour. Confused by the indescribable music and getting nervous, we reached John's parents' room and tried the door. It felt sealed, like when something heavy is against it, or a vacuum is applying pressure. However, the house was sealed and we were supposedly the first ones inside in a long time. With a good shove, we managed to open it and got the biggest gust of stale, dead, and musty air I've ever had. Freaked out by the sudden gust that smelled like death had once been there, we took off. Halfway crossing the street, Jim called out, "Hey guys, look at the house." Nervous what we would find, all 3 of us turned and saw a huge apparition, easily 6 foot plus, and solid fridge build, in the window. Solid looking, but you had to stare and squint hard to start to get the edges of details, and it was watching us, staring us down from inside. Obviously freaked, we ran all the way to John's current house. And that's the story of my first haunting/paranormal experience, way back in 8th grade. One of my classes was held in a cemetery recently because we were meeting with a guest speaker to learn about some of its inhabitants. While several of its inhabitants have died violently, the program was not gory or unsettling and focused on the accomplishments of those buried there. Regardless, strange things began to happen almost immediately upon arrival. One of my colleagues began feeling ill and was on the verge of unconsciousness. She had to return to her car to rest. A few minutes later, another classmate lost all color. He became white as paper and then began to sway. As he collapsed, several people rushed to catch him. At this point, everyone became nervous, but the program continued. One girl expressed concern that there may have been something wrong with the air to make the class sick. While no one else complained, several of my other classmates, usually quite tan as we live at the beach, began developing a deathly pallor of gray and white, and were almost as pale as the man who had fainted. We began hearing a woman screaming in the forest surrounding the graveyard as we trudged further into it, despite us being in a part of town miles away from any school or playground. This area is pretty much nothing but segregated graveyards side by side. There's at least 2 or 3 miles of graves. In fact, I was lost for 20 minutes that day while trying to reach my class, and I could neither find the road nor them. I only encountered one other person in that time, a woman walking her dog. These are very old cemeteries, and most of the bodies there belong to people who are not remembered by anyone alive. So there are few visitors beyond historians and genealogists. The guest speaker completely ignored the horrible sound, and we all exchanged some uneasy glances as she continued. I became dizzy and lightheaded, but it's not terribly unusual for me, because I frequently faint anyway and seldom sleep as much as I should. The others who sickened, however, had no existing medical conditions and predispositions to fainting. They were asked this by the professor in case they needed an ambulance. Both are thin and healthy people. The temperature was also cool, almost chilly, so it wasn't as if they overheated. Anyways, I just thought it was a weird thing to happen, especially so close to Halloween, when they say the veil between this world and the next is the thinnest. The chances of 2 healthy people entering pre-syncope and syncope within minutes of one another for the first time in their lives is extremely low, unless there's some sort of environmental factor responsible. I googled it, and apparently it's not very uncommon for people to faint in graveyards, so I was wondering if anyone has a good explanation for that phenomenon, natural or supernatural. My hubby is thoughtful. He had the best of intentions when he bought the old but safe 1984 Mercedes for myself and our daughter in 2002. The problem, the car was haunted. Not just haunted, it was possessed by something that did not like me. I honestly felt it wasn't me specifically, it was the fact that I was a woman. My hubby was excited because the car had history. It had been used in films and was owned by a famous divorce attorney. Yes, the car had been used in many films, and its primary owner was a prominent divorce attorney. However, he only represented husbands. That's important for later. Oh, also, he was found passed away in this car. It was always parked on our driveway, outside of our garage. Once parked there, our garage and also the room adjacent to the garage, our living room, remained incredibly dark. Even though our living room had an entire wall of windows, we could never seem to get enough light to see. There was a heaviness in the air too. Our daughter was petrified of the garage. Even though now the car has been gone for years and she's now 25, she still turns on all the lights before entering the garage. My hubby was so excited with the car's history. Well, whatever the history, it was clear as crystal. The car didn't like me. Anytime I drove it, it would stall and refuse to start. It would happen in bad places. The middle of the freeway was one, but its favorite was the middle of intersections. I would just be trying to get from point A to point B. Nope. I would call my hubby. I'm dead in the intersection again. Strangers are pushing the car as we speak. He sent the mechanic and the car was towed to his shop. The mechanic kept the car for 2 weeks trying to duplicate the problem. No luck. It drove fine. All systems checked out. My hubby called me to say the car was ready. He picked me up and dropped me at the mechanic shop. He stayed to see that the car started. On the way home, it again stalled. I informed my hubby then. I no longer cared if he believed me. I refused to drive that car again. My husband was now the only driver. He never had an issue with stalling again. Once it went past smog, it began to sit on our driveway and wreak havoc in our home. The darkness and negative energy was so thick it was suffocating. We were arguing all the time over nothing. I would come home in a good mood, only to feel frustration and anger once inside my home. This went on for years. Finally, we decided to get rid of the car. A tow company was scheduled to come take it away. I took pictures during the process. I was nervous, but excited to be rid of this evil. I still have the pictures, and I swear to this day, there is a visible face in the driver's side rear window that changes expressions as the car is being loaded onto the trailer. Once the car was gone, my home felt lighter. It was brighter. We no longer needed lights in our living room that had a wall of windows. The heaviness was gone. The anger and frustration that we felt about each other was gone too. We just celebrated 32 years together. If we had kept that car, we'd be divorced or one of us would be dead by now. I'm sure of that. I've lived in this house for 10 years now and never had any kind of paranormal experience before. That all changed once my neighbors moved in next door about 4 months ago. It was a husband and a wife. They had no children and they mostly kept to themselves. For the first month or so, there were no issues, but then the fighting started. All hours of the day, they were fighting and yelling. Cops came by more than a few times to talk to them and even took one of them away once or twice. Then a month ago, I was woken up to a loud bang and screaming. I didn't know if I had heard what I thought I had heard until 5 minutes later when I heard a succession of loud bangs. I've gone target shooting with friends before, and I know what a gunshot sounds like. I woke my wife up and told her to get the kids and go to the back of the house. If more shots were fired, I didn't want them ripping through our house and hitting someone. Our houses are pretty close together, so it was a concern of mine. Next, I grabbed my phone and called 911. The police were there quickly. Now, I wasn't allowed in, but I heard it was a pretty gruesome sight. The man was stabbed to death, but before he died of blood loss, he managed to shoot the woman twice. The last 3 shots I heard were from him laying on the floor, blindly shooting at nothing. A week later, strange things started happening around the house. Footsteps down the hallway at night, like someone was stomping angrily. We hear screams in the middle of the night coming from outside. My wife even swears she hears the couple still arguing sometimes. The sounds outside I can understand, but why are they stomping down my hallway? Can negative energy move next door? Maybe it's PTSD. It was pretty traumatic to hear your neighbors kill each other. Of course, I feel sad for them and wish it had never happened, but other than that, it doesn't impact me personally. I never even met them to know them. They would go to work and then come home, and never left otherwise that I know of. We've also felt cold spots around the house, usually on the side closest to those neighbors. So that makes me think it's more than PTSD and an actual haunting. I'm not really into paranormal things, so I don't know what to do. I believe ghosts exist, but have never experienced one before. Do I get a priest, smudge the house? Any recommendations are appreciated. I live in a small village in Canada. Only about 2,000 people live here, and we're mostly surrounded by trees. We've all heard stories of Bigfoot or some kind of unexplainable event happening out there in the woods. Some people even go as far as to say they've seen aliens or have been abducted. Most of us just nod our heads and go along with it. Obviously, these people have had some kind of experience that shook them up, and no one is judgmental around here. Anyways, it's my usual routine to go hiking out in the woods every Saturday. I've had a couple of experiences myself, but nothing that I couldn't rationalize away somehow. Twigs snapping, must be an animal I can't see. Cold breeze out of nowhere, just the chill coming off the mountain. Hearing a voice when no one else is around, just my imagination. This time, however, something happened that I can't explain. As I said before, I walk out there every Saturday, and normally I just use the trail that leads out of town. But this time, I wanted to do something a little different. About a mile out of town, and with a cup of Tim Hortons in hand, I went off the trail and roamed around freely. I had never done this before, and almost immediately I was seeing parts of the woods I had never seen before. There was a cool little stream that ran parallel to the trail, around 100 meters away. A little birch grove was not far off from there, which I found surprising among all the evergreens. I kept going, just wandering around for an hour, when I came across a little shack. I didn't think anything of it at first. This is Canada, and there were a lot of trappers out here back in the day. Curiosity got the best of me, and I went to check out the structure. Almost immediately, I got a bad feeling about the place, but I pushed that out of my mind with rationalization. The door to the place had collapsed a long time ago, and the roof sagged in a bit. From outside, I couldn't even see inside because it was so dark in there and bright where I was. I figured once I went in though, my eyes would just adjust and I'd be able to see there was nothing in there. I went in and at first, stuff was hard to make out, but after a minute I could see an old rocking chair in the corner next to a fireplace. The floor was gone and I was walking on dirt. There wasn't much else in there except for some drawings on the wall. They didn't mean anything to me, and the only one I could make out was a pentagram. I know it can be used for protection, but it got me thinking about protection from what? I noped out of there pretty fast after seeing that, and was speed walking away. That's when a gust of cold air hit me right in the face. It was a warm autumn day, and the wind didn't touch any other part of my body. It was a blast straight to my face. I couldn't explain that one. I hadn't felt much of a breeze anywhere else while walking, but this was a strong gust. And again, I only felt it on my face. I picked up my pace and was jogging now. I then not only heard one voice, but a few voices whispering in the woods. After that, I was flat out sprinting out of there and dropped my coffee cup as I went. I must have been almost halfway back to the trail when I finally slowed down because of the stitch in my side. Things were quiet for a minute or two, and I used that time to catch my breath. But then I heard twigs snapping, not just one, but a couple, from different areas in the woods. I began to sprint again, even though I thought I was about to throw up. I've never been so spooked before in my whole life. This time, I didn't stop until I got to the birch grove. I couldn't keep going, so I stopped there to rest for a minute. The grove was kind of weird because, unlike the rest of the forest that has trees growing densely together, the grove has a good 5 meters of open space between it and the rest of the trees. I thought if anything was after me, I'd be able to see it coming and still have a good head start to get out of there. Once my breathing was under control and my heart stopped pounding, I sat there and listened for a minute. There was nothing out of the ordinary that I heard, and I was just about to leave when another gust of wind swept through the area. This time it was all around and not just at my face, but it picked up pine needles and some leaves, turning into a little dust devil. I heard voices whispering again, and the mini tornado crashed against the birch grove, then nothing else. I stood there, stunned and confused on whether I imagined that last part or not for at least 10 minutes. And when nothing else happened, I made my way past the small stream, onto the trail and back home. I haven't been back out there since, and nothing abnormal has happened around the house. Could all just have been some weird coincidence coupled with me being spooked finding a cabin out in the woods. Or it could have been something. I never really saw anything concrete, like an apparition or something move or anything like that. It was just a freaky thing that happened to me while out alone in the woods. This started ever since I moved into my new college dorm at the beginning of the school year. I'm a freshman, and this is my first time living out on my own. I was a little scared at first to be away from my parents and hometown, but everyone I've met has been so awesome that those feelings have passed. It began small the first night I was there. My roommate and I had gotten into our beds, and I know I had closed and locked the door. He even double-checked it because he hadn't seen me do it. Well, we were in bed talking about our hometowns and what we missed, When the door swung wide open, it freaked us both out at first, but then we figured it was someone messing with us, so we closed and locked it again and went to bed. Nothing else happened the rest of the night, but every night after that, it would be something little. Closet doors would open for no reason, a window would slam shut or open a bit, the lights would cut off for a minute and then come back on, or our jackets would fall off the hangers randomly. This went on for a solid month before they scaled up. We would come back from class and the sheets on our beds would be tossed all over the room. The faucet would be running full blast, or the clothes from our drawers would be spilled onto the floor. Even when we were in the room studying, we would feel someone touch our shoulder, and one time my chair started to roll on its own when I was sitting in it. We went to the RA and told him what was going on. He didn't seem to believe us, but said he would ask security to look into it. They just came by and looked around the room and left. We have this one religious friend that came by and prayed over the room, as well as a Native American friend that did a smudging that seems to have taken care of it. We did our best to look into any history of the room or dorms that may have caused this, but there was nothing there. Who knows what other students have done in that room before that might have invited a spirit in. I'm just glad it's over because it was really starting to get to me. When I was in high school, there was a lot of local folklore about a man who allegedly shot and killed his wife and daughter before taking his own life in their family home. The incident occurred many years prior in a now abandoned 2-story home located between 2 wheat fields. I grew up in the boonies, so it was quite common for old farmhouses to be built in such a manner. The year was 2001, and my senior year had just begun a couple of months prior. I don't remember the exact month, but I'm assuming October, because I remember the crisp, cool autumn air had just rolled upon us. One evening, a group of about 8 or so friends and I decided we would visit the infamous house and scope it out for kicks. Before leaving my house, I had the idea I would play a prank on my pals, which involved a small bottle of red food coloring. I placed the food coloring in my pocket, locked my bedroom door, and left to meet up with the gang. We arrived at the location in 2 separate cars. One car was packed with the guys. The other car was driven by one of our female classmates and 2 of her girlfriends. The house was situated on a slight hill, which met a gravel driveway. We parked our cars in the driveway in front of the home's garage and began our trek up the hill. The very first thing I noticed was a very sad, dead-looking tree located in the middle of the yard. The grass felt very strange beneath my feet, quite spongy and soft, as though it was rotted with disease. This particularly stood out to me because I had never felt grass quite like this before, especially without any recent rain. The house was completely boarded up with plywood, but there was a small opening in the front door which appeared to be broken from a previous visitor. Equipped with our flashlights, we began scoping out the interior of the home, searching for any evidence a murder actually took place. The interior was decorated with dingy floral wallpaper. The walls were bare hardwood throughout. In the main entry, we saw what appeared to be blood splatters where the wall met the ceiling, and several apparent gunshot holes. I'm a skeptic by nature, and thought it could have possibly been faked by previous visitors to feed into the lore. Whatever the case, the blood appeared a very dull brown color, indicating it had been there for a very long time. We walked up past a set of creaky steps to the upstairs, which featured 2 bedrooms. One room had an old metal bed frame and bare mattress, but was otherwise empty. I can't remember if I entered the second room or not. We all stood in one of the bedrooms talking and expressing our predictions as to what we believed happened before making our way back downstairs. We continued exploring the main level living space and dining room before reaching the kitchen. I noticed there was a door leading from the kitchen to a small breezeway behind the house. I was the first to check it out and knew this was the time to pull off my prank. As I entered the breezeway, I reached into my pocket, tilted my head back, and filled right underneath my eye socket with red food coloring. I banged my flashlight against the wall to create a loud thud, fell to the ground, and screamed at the top of my lungs, "Something just hit me! Go, go, go!" We all bolted from the house at top speed. One of the girls even stumbled down the hill and collided with her passenger door. I entered the back seat of her car, holding my eye, screaming with my hands and face covered in fake blood. I remember the girl in the passenger seat yelling over and over, "Get him to the ER! Get him to the ER! His eye is gone!" They frantically drove about 15 to 20 minutes to the nearest hospital as I writhed in pain in the back seat. The entire ride I was wailing, "Something hit me! I don't know what it was! What just happened?" We finally get to the hospital parking lot with the other car right behind us. Everyone got out and we began swiftly walking to the entrance before I let out a maniacal laugh to reveal it was all a prank. A couple of the girls were pretty pissed, but the guys completely lost it and couldn't stop laughing. After several minutes, the mood lightened, and the other girls finally saw the humor in the situation. Overall, it was a hit. I got home late that night and cleaned up for school the next morning. When I woke up, everything felt completely off. I kept hearing what sounded like incessant whispering ringing in my ears. It reminded me of the sound of people whispering in church or at a funeral, with the sound of the letter S resonating the most. I walked over to my closet to grab a t-shirt and noticed a freezing cold spot in my room, just in front of my closet door. Our house didn't have central air, only heating vents in the floor, so this frigid spot made absolutely zero sense. I opened my closet door, and every single piece of clothing was laying in a ball on the floor. I was dumbfounded because I locked my door before I left and always hung up my clothes, even my t-shirt. My house was empty that morning because my mom worked the 12-hour night shift, and my little brother spent the night at our cousin's house because I knew I wouldn't get home until late the night before. As I walked downstairs to my living room, the whispering sound intensified. Goosebumps covered my arm and my heart started to pound. I grew very alarmed as I realized this was more than just morning cobwebs or grogginess. I drove to school and the whispering sounds would not stop. I thought I was completely losing my mind, so I pulled one of my friends who was a devout Christian into the restroom and started crying. I told him I thought maybe I was haunted due to my antics from the night before. I tried my best to explain the situation, but I caught him off guard and I didn't feel like he was taking me seriously. As the school day went on, the whispering sounds persisted, and my friends who were there for the shenanigans couldn't stop talking about my prank. I did my best to hold myself together and not reveal that anything was wrong. I didn't want that kind of attention, and especially didn't want them to think I was crazy, since the heart-to-heart with my Christian friend didn't go the way I anticipated. When the school day ended, I immediately checked my room and still felt the freezing cold spot in front of my closet. I truly believed at this point I was without a doubt being haunted. A few days went by and I was having great difficulty sleeping. I kept seeing/envisioning a dark shadow in the corner of my room, about the height of a small child. I did my best to ignore it as the shadow began to move from one spot to another, eventually standing directly beside where I rest my head. The following day, I told my mom about my visit to the abandoned house and the prank I pulled on my friends. She was very disappointed I would disrespect the alleged murder victims, but she was also very supportive in me finding help. She's very spiritual and recommended I meet with a church member to get cleansed and also have my room cleansed. I did not, and still don't, subscribe to any religion in the slightest. However, at this point I was desperate. I went to the church and bared my soul to the priest, expressing sorrow for my actions, for fooling my friends, entering the abandoned house, and exploiting victims for my personal amusement. Later that evening, a member of the church came to my house, lit candles and said a prayer in my bedroom. The next day, no more cold spot, no more audible whispering. After a week of feeling absolutely insane, it seemed to be over. About a month later, I developed a very deep depression. I began feeling incredibly dark emotions I had never felt before. These feelings would continue to grow through the winter and into spring of 2002 when baseball season rolled around. I was a lifelong baseball player who was being recruited by a few schools in the area. I was so depressed I opted not to play, forfeiting any possible chance at a scholarship, and thus ending my baseball career, a decision I strongly regret to this day. I had simply lost interest in everything other than sleeping. I shut out my friends, parents, pretty much everyone for the next couple of months. By the time graduation rolled around, I ended up rekindling a friendship with one of my early childhood friends. He and I played baseball together back in first grade and were best of friends in grade school. We kinda drifted apart over the years, but something drew us back together and we hung out all summer. The stronger our friendship became, the less apparent my depression was. It ultimately fizzled out by fall, and I ended up attending college out of state. 20 years later, the whispers haven't come back. No cold spots, no dark shadows, nothing, all put to rest. I haven't thought about my haunting in a very long time, but this past year it's crept up from time to time. No bad feelings, just memories. I've been wanting to tell this story for the past couple months to hopefully aid anyone who may be experiencing something similar, whether it was a true supernatural experience or my own fears projected into reality. I needed help, and I'm so very thankful I spoke up. Thanks especially to my mother, who pushed aside her disappointment to ensure her son was okay. If you're feeling off, please ask for help. No matter how silly your problems may sound.